When did I first realize that I wanted to become a parent? Well, I've always wanted children, ever since I was little. My mother is gone now, bless her heart, but I still remember her telling me, I hope you never have any children because I don't want them to become deaf like you. And I thought, what? Oh my goodness, I just felt terrible. And then I worried because I started to worry because I thought, well, am I going to be a good parent or not? But I had to stay positive. My husband is always positive. Roger was, oh, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. So he's always been really positive. But deep down inside, I still have a little bit of that, that doubt.
It never really occurred to me that Sherry being deaf would be an issue until her mother said something, and we had conversations about that. But my parents were always very excited about us having children and very supportive of us adopting both internationally and domestically.
Well, our two oldest children are hearing. Our four remaining are all deaf. 3 of them use hearing aids.
People always ask us, how many of your kids are deaf? And I said, well, I don't know. I've got 4 who can't hear and 2 who don't listen. I'm not really sure it makes much difference.
Well, we had a lamp, and it would flash. It would pick up sounds. And back then, they called it a TTY, teletypewriter. And that's how we would make phone calls.
Well, the baby cry has 2 halves. The half that's in the baby's room and the half that's in our room. So there's a half in the baby's room that picks up the sound, and then there's a half in our room that flashes a light. And then, of course, we have what we think of as kind of normal things for deaf homes, doorbells, fire alarms.
Right. The light would flash on the doorbell.
Now we have a video phone. We didn't have video phones when our first kids were born because they hadn't been invented, but now we have a video phone, so everybody makes phone calls, using sign language through the internet.
I think today I've noticed that some of the baby monitors have videos that you can watch the baby. If you're in another room, you can watch the baby. They didn't have that in our time.
When we think about our friends, most of them were very enthusiastic. Many of them were excited about us adopting, especially adopting internationally. We've had, I don't know how many friends who've said, oh, deaf people can adopt. And when they found out we were adopting deaf children.
A lot of people said that.
So there were a lot of folks who were, even our deaf friends were surprised to find out that deaf people could adopt. We have several friends who have adopted both domestically and internationally because they know we adopted, and they know, we could tell them what the process was like and what they had to do.
I think some of our frustrations would have been with domestic adoption. Having the TPR for 2 foster children took forever. I mean, it was obvious that was what the end result was going to be. The birth parents were never fit parents, never became fit parents. They constantly dragged the whole thing out. With the international adoption, it was much quicker. I mean, it's a long process with the home study and collecting the documents, putting them all together, sending them off. It was a long process to do that, but the actual adoption process itself was very quick. It took 2 weeks. And we were done. We flew to China and wrapped everything up and left. It was about 10 days, which I feel was very short.
But I think for some deaf parents, they have troubles with both domestic and international adoptions in terms of that agency being accessible, like foster parent classes. We've had to argue about providing an interpreter for the classes, or providing an interpreter for the whole process. Courts, by and large, are okay, but the agency themselves, they don't think about having persons who are deaf as adoptive parents. They might know about adopted kids, but how many times did we have social workers show up at home to interview our kids or my wife, and there's no interpreter? And they might have used me as the interpreter. And of course, I would say I was a perfect parent. And, and of course, if they interviewed our kids, they loved their dad no matter what they said, but I mean, they just weren't thinking about how would they have that communication directly with the child.
Right. And I think it depends on the social worker and the agency, what their perception is of the situation. If they feel that the deaf parents would become good parents, if they felt that, they wouldn't be, that would be a barrier. So it really depends on what their perceived or preconceived feelings were and what their opinions were about deaf people in general. I mean, they think they go through the process and they're like, a deaf person becoming a parent? I don't think so. It needs to be a hearing person, especially if a deaf person wants to adopt a hearing child. That was a different story. There's a problem. With deaf children, it was a little bit more flexible. It makes it harder to find parents that are willing to adopt a deaf child. Deaf parents and hearing children wanting to adopt a hearing child, which is very difficult. A lot of agencies were against that. They were not supportive of that idea.
China was fairly open about deaf people adopting deaf kids. I do wonder how they would have reacted to deaf people adopting hearing kids. But to be honest, most of the deaf people I know have been more interested in adopting deaf kids. So I don't really know how that experience would go.
Well, they need to make their process more accessible and realize that deaf parents are capable of being good parents, it's just like anyone else,
The message I would give them is reach out to the deaf community. Has a DSS worker ever spoken at the Association of the Deaf meeting? Have they talked about adopting? Provide notification that there are children who need homes through the deaf community networks. Just this afternoon, when somebody found out I was coming here to talk about being a parent, they said, I'm thinking about adopting, but I don't know where to get started. I don't know where do I go with that whole process. So, and if they call DSS, they're going to run into right away, we don't have anybody who can sign. We don't have an interpreter for that class. You'll have to bring an interpreter to that class. If you can't answer the phone, how am I supposed to talk to you? So those kind of just real basic things I think if the adoption workers were a little bit more willing to reach out to the community. Now, is everybody who's deaf going to be an adoptive parent? Of course not. But there are some who want to be and just find the system not accessible.